Carlos hadn't set foot in his childhood home for nearly a decade. The old house, with its creaking wooden floors and dimly lit hallways, felt foreign to him now. Dust clung to every surface, and the air smelled of aged wood and something else. Something stale, as if the walls had trapped whispers from the past. His mother greeted him with a tired smile, her face lined with years of silent grief. The house had been too big for just her since his father passed away. She moved slowly, carefully, as if the weight of memories pressed down on her shoulders. "I thought you wouldn't come," she admitted, stirring a cup of tea in the dimly lit kitchen. The single bulb above them flickered erratically. "But I'm glad you're here. There are things that need sorting." Carlos nodded, feeling a pang of guilt. He had stayed away for a reason. There was always something unsettling about this house. He blamed it on childhood fears, but even now as an adult, a vague unease prickled at his skin. Later that evening, while his mother rested, he wandered the house, his fingers grazing the familiar textures of peeling wallpaper and dusty furniture. His feet carried him to the attic door, half hidden at the end of the hallway. He hesitated before opening it, a chill creeping up his spine as the hinges groaned in protest. The attic was just as he remembered. Dim, cluttered, filled with forgotten relics of a life that had moved on. Boxes upon boxes stacked against the walls, old furniture draped in yellowing sheets. He pulled the string of a dangling light bulb, casting eerie shadows across the room. One particular box caught his eye. It was pushed against the far wall, covered in an old cloth. Curiosity gnawed at him as he dragged it toward the center of the room and peeled back the fabric. Inside, a collection of old photographs lay stacked neatly, bound together with brittle twine. He sifted through them, his breath catching at the sight of familiar faces. His mother, his father, and himself, younger, happier. But then, his fingers stopped on a single photograph that didn't make sense. It was an old picture of his mother standing outside the house, holding the hand of a young boy. The child was identical to him. Same dark eyes, same unruly hair. Yet the date scrawled in faded ink at the back marked the photo as taken years before his birth. Carlos frowned, staring at the picture for what felt like an eternity. His pulse quickened as an irrational but undeniable fear settled in his stomach. Who was this boy? A sudden creak sounded from the attic doorway. His head snapped up, but there was nothing there, just the deep shadows of the hallway stretching toward his mother's room. Clutching the photograph, he descended the attic stairs, his mind swirling with questions. He needed answers, and he knew exactly who to ask. Carlos sat across from his mother in the dimly lit living room, the photograph resting on the coffee table between them. The air was thick with unspoken tension. His mother's hands trembled as she reached for the picture, her eyes widening in silent recognition. "Where did you find this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "In the attic," Carlos replied. "Who is this boy? He looks just like me." His mother's gaze darted toward the window as if searching for an escape. That's impossible," she murmured. "This picture must be a mistake." "A mistake?" Carlos scoffed, feeling frustration rise. "The date on the back is from before I was born. Mom, I need the truth." Her lips parted, but no words came out. Instead, she stood abruptly, gathering the picture in her frail hands. "It's late. We'll talk tomorrow." Carlos clenched his jaw as she retreated down the hallway, the photograph still in her grip. He wanted to follow her, to demand answers, but something in her expression, an unfathomable fear, made him hesitate. That night, Carlos lay in his childhood bed, his mind racing. Every creak of the house felt amplified in the silence. The shadows in the corners seemed darker than he remembered, shifting ever so slightly when he wasn't looking directly at them. At some point, exhaustion overtook him, pulling him into uneasy dreams. He was standing in the attic again, the light flickering. Above, the box of photographs lay open at his feet, but this time he wasn't alone. A boy stood at the far end of the room, his back turned. His posture was eerily still. "Who are you?" Carlos asked, his voice trembling. The boy didn't answer. Slowly, he turned his head, not fully, just enough for Carlos to glimpse a sliver of his face. It was him, but not him. The boy's eyes were hollow, his lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. Carlos woke with a jolt, his body drenched in cold sweat. His breath came in ragged gasps as his eyes darted around the darkened room. A soft rustling sound came from the hallway. He wasn't alone. Carlos held his breath, straining to hear past the hammering of his own heartbeat. The rustling sound had stopped, leaving behind a silence that felt unnatural, like the house itself was waiting. He forced himself to sit up, his body tense. The door to his room was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness peeking through. Swallowing hard, he slid out of bed and padded toward it, his fingers hovering over the doorknob. A sudden movement caught his eye. Across the room, the old dresser. Mirror reflected the dim light from the hallway, but something was wrong. His reflection wasn't moving. Carlos took a slow step back, his breath hitching. His mirrored self remained perfectly still, eyes locked onto his own. Then, ever so slightly, it tilted its head, the corners of its mouth twitching upward in a grin that Carlos knew he wasn't making. Panic surged through him. He turned away. From the mirror, his pulse roaring in his ears. He needed to get out of the room, out of the house. A whisper slithered through the air. "I see you." Carlos bolted for the door, yanking it open and stumbling into the hallway. The house was eerily quiet, save for the distant ticking of a clock downstairs. He pressed a hand to his chest, trying to steady his breathing. His mind screamed at him to leave, to wake his mother, to do anything but stand there frozen. Then, from behind him, a soft creak sounded from inside his room. He didn't dare look back. Carlos forced himself to move, his steps quick and unsteady as he made his way down the hallway. His mother's door was closed, but he knocked urgently, his pulse drumming in his ears. "Mom?" he called, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are you awake?" No answer. He knocked again, harder this time. The door creaked open slightly, revealing nothing but darkness inside. Then, from within the room, his mother's voice, thin and trembling. "Carlos, is that you?" Something about the way she said it made his skin crawl. Carlos stepped inside cautiously, his hand trembling as he reached for the light switch. The bulb flickered weakly before stabilizing, casting a dim glow over the room. His mother sat upright in bed, the photograph still clutched in her hands. Her eyes were wide, filled with something between fear and sorrow. She looked at Carlos as if she were unsure whether to trust her own sight. "Mom," Carlos whispered, "tell me the truth." Her fingers trembled around the edges of the photograph. She exhaled shakily, her lips pressing together as though suppressing something too terrible to speak. "It was never supposed to be like this," she murmured. Carlos stepped closer, his pulse drumming in his ears. What was never supposed to be? "Like this? Who is this boy?" His mother let out a slow breath, finally raising her gaze to meet his. "Your brother, your twin." Carlos felt the floor shift beneath him. "Twin? You told me I was an only child." I lied. The words came out fragile, but they carried a terrible weight. "You weren't born alone. There were two of you. But something wrong." A cold shudder crept up Carlos's spine. "What do you mean, wrong?" His mother hesitated, glancing at the shadows pooling in the corners of the room, as if expecting something to crawl out of them. "He wasn't like you. He wasn't like anyone. He never cried, never made a sound. He would just watch. He had a way of making people uneasy. Your father? He thought something unnatural had come into this world." Carlos felt his breath grow shallow. So what did he do? A tear slipped down her cheek. He took your brother from me. Said he was doing what had to be done. But even after he was gone, things didn't stop. At night I would hear him, his laughter, see him in the mirrors. It was like he had never left. Carlos's body went rigid. The mirror, the reflection that wasn't his, the whispers in the dark. "Mom," he said slowly, "I think he's still here." A gust of wind rattled the windows, making them both jump. The lamp on the bedside table flickered wildly, plunging the room into erratic flashes of darkness. Carlos turned sharply toward the doorway, a feeling of dread clawing at his chest. Then, from the hallway, a voice, soft, almost playful. "You finally remember me." Carlos whipped around, but there was no one there. Just the long, yawning stretch of the corridor beyond his mother's room. His mother's grip on his wrist was painfully tight. "Don't listen to him," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "Don't let him in." Carlos swallowed hard, his body rigid. "Let him in?" The shadows in the hallway seemed to stretch, bending unnaturally toward him. The whisper came again, closer this time, weaving through the air like silk. "You took my life. Now I want yours." Carlos staggered back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The air in the room turned thick and suffocating, as if the very house was holding its breath. Then, the door to his room down the hall creaked open by itself. Carlos didn't want to go. Every instinct screamed at him to stay with his mother, to run, to never step foot into that darkness. But something deep inside compelled him forward. The moment he set foot into the hallway, the light bulb above flickered out. His mother let out a choked sob behind him, and from inside his darkened bedroom, the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, then a whisper right by his ear. "Let's trade places." The door slammed shut behind him. Carlos stood frozen in the suffocating darkness of his childhood bedroom. The silence was thick, pressing against his eardrums, as if the air itself had become solid. He reached for the light switch, but his fingers met nothing but empty space. The room felt different, larger, emptier, as if the walls had stretched further apart. Then a soft breath against his neck. "You don't belong here." Carlos spun around, heart hammering against his ribs. The darkness swallowed everything beyond an arm's length. He took a cautious step forward, his foot barely making a sound against the wooden floor. The mirror stood at the far end of the room, its glass slick with shadows. The reflection inside wasn't right. It showed the room, but Carlos wasn't in it. Instead, a boy stood there, the boy from the photograph. Carlos's mouth went dry. "What do you want?" The boy in the mirror smiled. It was slow, unnatural, stretching, too far across his pale face. "To come home." Carlos felt the air grow colder. "You're not real." The boy tilted his head. "Aren't I?" Before Carlos could react, the reflection moved, not mimicking his actions, but stepping forward, pressing its hands against the glass. A crack splintered across the surface. Then another. The sound of shattering filled the air as the mirror burst outward, shards flying toward Carlos. He stumbled back, throwing up his arms to shield his face. But when he lowered them, the mirror was whole again, and the boy was gone. A whisper slithered through the darkness. "You can't keep me out forever." Carlos turned, his chest rising and falling with rapid breaths. The air shifted, the walls seeming to press inward. Then behind him, the closet door creaked open an inch. He didn't move, couldn't. The space beyond the doorway was impossibly black. Then, something crawled out. A hand, small, skeletal, emerged first, gripping the floorboards with unnatural strength. Then came the arm, the elbow bending the wrong way. Slowly, a figure pulled itself into the room. The boy. His body twisted and elongated as he moved, his head tilting at an angle too sharp for a human neck. Carlos backed away, his breath coming in shuddering gasps. "Stay away from me." The boy grinned, his teeth too many, too sharp. You don't get to choose. The room spun. Carlos felt himself losing balance, his vision tunneling as the air thickened around him. Then as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. Silence. When he opened his eyes, he was no longer in his bedroom. He was standing in the attic, the same attic where he had found the photograph, where it had all begun, and across the room, standing in front of the mirror, was himself, or rather the thing that wore his face. You should have stayed away, it whispered. Carlos stared at the reflection in the mirror, his heartbeat a thunderous drum in his chest. The figure mimicked his stance but not his expression. It smiled, a slow, knowing grin that sent ice through Carlos's veins. You took my place once, the reflection whispered, tilting its head. Now it's my turn. Carlos felt the air around him constrict, the attic seeming to darken at the edges. The walls pulsed, the shadows stretching closer. He tried to step back, but his feet felt glued to the floor. The figure in the mirror stepped forward. The surface of the glass rippled like water, distorting the attic's reflection. Carlos watched, paralyzed, as the other version of himself pushed a hand through the mirror. Its fingers stretched unnaturally long before gripping the wooden floorboards. Then came the arm, followed by a shoulder, as it pulled itself free from the glass inch by inch. Carlos gasped and stumbled backward, the air thick with an oppressive force. He could hear the house groaning, the walls seeming to breathe. The attic door was gone, replaced by endless dark space, as if reality itself was collapsing inward. The other Carlos stepped fully into the attic. His skin was too pale, his eyes just a little too hollow. His grin never wavered. I've waited a long time for this, the doppelganger whispered, tilting its head. You have no idea what it was like, being forgotten, being erased. Carlos clenched his fists, forcing himself to hold his ground. You're not real, you're just a memory. The thing laughed softly, the sound eerily like Carlos's own voice. A memory? You don't get it, do you? You were never meant to be the only one. You stole my life, and now I'm taking it back. Before Carlos could react, the doppelganger lunged at him. Carlos barely managed to twist away, feeling icy fingers graze his arm. He scrambled toward the mirror, but the reflection no longer showed his world. It showed something else. A vast, endless void swirling in darkness, and at the center, countless shadowy figures watching. A terrible realization crashed over him. The mirror wasn't just a portal, it was a prison, and whatever was inside wasn't just his twin. It was something much worse. The doppelganger grabbed his wrist, yanking him back with unnatural strength. Carlos shouted, struggling against its grip, but it was like fighting a corpse, cold, unyielding. You can't fight this, the thing murmured, dragging him toward the mirror. It's already decided, Carlos thrashed, kicking wildly, his breath coming in panicked gasps. His free hand found a splintered wooden beam nearby, and he swung it with all his strength. The impact landed against the doppelganger's face, shattering its skin like fragile porcelain. Beneath, there was only darkness. It shrieked, recoiling, its fingers loosening just enough for Carlos to break free. He staggered back, his mind racing. There had to be a way to end this, to seal the mirror, to send it back where it came from. The attic pulsed again, the wooden floor twisting beneath his feet. The mirror began to ripple violently, as if something else was pushing against it from the other side, desperate to escape. Then, a voice. His mother's voice. Carlos! He turned toward the sound, his heart leaping. At the entrance to the attic, where the door had not been a moment ago, stood his mother, her eyes wide with terror. She held something in her hands. A photograph. The picture, she cried, stepping closer. It's the key! Carlos's mind reeled. The photograph, the one that had started it all. His mother lifted it high, and as she did, the mirror reacted. The reflection within began to tear apart, its surface splintering like ice. The doppelganger let out a piercing, unearthly scream, clutching its face as deep cracks spidered across. Its form, it turned toward Carlos, eyes wide in fury and desperation. "No," it hissed. "No, this isn't how it ends." But it was. Carlos lunged for the photograph, just as his mother threw it toward the mirror. The moment the picture touched the glass, there was a blinding flash of light. The doppelganger howled, its body disintegrating into shadow. The mirror shattered outward, sending shards flying in every direction. Carlos hit the ground hard, gasping for breath as silence filled the attic. When he dared to look up, the mirror was gone. All that remained was an empty frame and a stillness that felt final. His mother rushed to him, pulling him into a tight embrace. "It's over," she whispered, stroking his hair. "You're safe." Carlos wanted to believe her. He really did. But then, from somewhere deep in the house, a soft laugh echoed, and the attic light flickered once. Carlos sat on the floor of the attic, his breathing uneven. His mother clutched his shoulders tightly, her own body trembling. The shattered remains of the mirror lay scattered around them like frozen fragments of a nightmare. But something wasn't right. The house was too quiet. Not the silence of peace, but something else, something waiting, a whisper, faint, almost imperceptible. Then, the laugh again. Carlos turned sharply to his mother. "Tell me it's over." Her lips parted, but no words came out. Instead, her gaze flickered past him, over his shoulder into the darkened corner of the attic. Carlos followed her stare and felt his stomach drop. A shadow moved, not in the way light bends, not in the way things shift naturally. This thing slithered across the wooden floor, pulling itself toward them. The air turned thick and wrong, the atmosphere pressing against his lungs. Every fiber of Carlos's being screamed at him to run. Then, the whisper returned, closer now, curling against his ear. "Did you really think it would be that easy?" The attic groaned around them, the wooden beams creaking under an unseen force. Carlos's mother tightened her grip on his arm, her nails digging into his skin. He turned to her, searching her face for reassurance, for anything that could ground him. But her eyes remained fixed on the moving darkness. A tendril of shadow stretched across the floor, reaching out like a grasping hand. Carlos scrambled backward, his heart hammering. The thing in the darkness had no defined shape, shifting and writhing like liquid smoke, but its intent was clear. It was still here, and it was not done with them. His mother suddenly gasped, "Carlos, get out of here!" Before he could respond, the tendril of shadow lashed forward, wrapping around her ankle. She cried out as it dragged her toward the darkness. "No!" Carlos lunged, grabbing her arms, pulling with all his strength, but the force yanking her away was immense, relentless. Her eyes met his, wide with terror. "It's not him! It's never been him!" she choked out. "It's something else!" Carlos's grip slipped. The darkness swallowed her legs, pulling her deeper into the shadows. "Mom!" he screamed, his fingers scraping uselessly against the wooden floor as she was yanked further away. Desperate, he grabbed a jagged shard of the broken mirror and drove it into the shadowy tendril. A horrible shriek filled the attic, the very walls trembling with the force of it. The tendril recoiled, writhing, and for a brief moment his mother was free. Carlos pulled her up, dragging her away from the darkness, but she was weak, her breath ragged. "We have to end this," she gasped. The mirror wasn't the source. It was just a doorway. It's still open somewhere. Carlos looked around, his mind racing. If the mirror was only a portal, then where was the real source? His eyes landed on something half buried beneath the shattered glass and dust. The photograph, the one that had started everything. He picked it up with trembling hands. The image had changed. The boy in the photograph, his brother, was now staring directly at him, his mouth twisted in an unnatural grin. His eyes, once hollow, now burned with something malevolent. Carlos's stomach churned. "It's in here," he whispered. "It's inside the picture." The shadows surged again, as if reacting to his realization. The attic shook violently, dust and debris raining from the rafters. Carlos's mother clutched his arm. "Destroy it." He hesitated. Could it really be that simple? The darkness rushed toward them, faster than before. Carlos's mind screamed for action. He gritted his teeth, and with every ounce of strength, he tore the photograph in half. A sound erupted, not just a scream, but something deeper, something ancient and furious. The darkness convulsed, writhing violently. The attic shuddered as if the house itself were coming apart at the seams. Then the shadows collapsed inward, spiraling into the torn pieces of the photograph, pulling everything with them. Carlos and his mother braced themselves as the force nearly dragged them in. The room warped, folding in on itself as the entity let out one last agonized wail, and then silence. The air was still, the house unmoving, the attic empty. Carlos staggered to his feet, his chest rising and falling in heaving breaths. The photograph lay in tatters, its once haunting image now blank, lifeless paper. The thing inside was gone. His mother wept softly, her hands shaking. Carlos sank to the floor beside her, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, his mother whispered, "Is it over?" Carlos looked around, his body tense, waiting for something, anything to stir in the dark corners of the attic, but there was nothing. No whispers, no laughter, just silence. "I think so," he murmured. They stayed like that for what felt like hours before finally finding the strength to leave the attic. The house felt different now, lighter, as if it too had been freed from something unspeakable. Carlos turned back one last time before shutting the attic door. A shiver ran through him, but he told himself it was just nerves, just exhaustion. Still, as they walked down the hallway, he couldn't shake the feeling that something, somewhere, was still watching. And as they stepped out of the house into the cool night air, a faint whisper drifted from the attic. "I'll be waiting." If you like this story, subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, leave your like, and see you in the next video.